Hello, everyone who's joining us on Zoom. How is everyone tonight? I'm just gonna wait a minute here for everyone to trickle in. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today and happy Cinco de Mayo. My name is Becca and I'm the marketing manager here at Alluring Africa. Today we are joined by James Currie, conservationist, author, and wildlife TV host. And today James is sharing updates about 3 conservation projects in Africa. So if you have any questions during the presentation, you can use the raise your hand feature and we'll unmute your microphone. But if you prefer the chat box, that's fine too. So without further ado, James, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Becca. Welcome, everybody. I hope you've all got a sundowner drink with you, wherever you are. Hopefully it's sundowner time. It certainly is here in Florida. Just to add to what Becca was saying when she introduced me, as well as doing various other things, I also work for Wilderness Safaris as Wilderness Safaris' brand ambassador. And we are a strong partner of Alluring Africa. We work very closely with them on creating unforgettable journeys for you and for those of you that are agents for your clients in Africa. And they're a wonderful partner to work with. I must just start by saying, you know, if you've ever tried to book Africa through Expedia or booking.com, you probably are not going to do it again. if you've done it once. There are too many moving parts to book a successful safari to Africa, and certainly Alluring Africa are amongst the best, and you're in good hands if you ever want to travel to Africa, certainly with them. So what I'd like to touch on tonight is 3 conservation projects that our company, Wilderness Safaris, is involved with on the ground in Africa. And basically they relate to 3 species. So we're going to break this webinar down into 3 different presentations or 3 different sections. One dealing with the plight-facing lions in Africa, the next African wild dogs, and we're going to finish off with an important project that we're involved with right now in Rwanda with chimpanzees. So I really love this map because it gives you a great picture on just how vast the continent of Africa is. You know, look at that. You're fitting the United States, the whole of Western Europe, Eastern Europe, India, China, Japan, and the UK, all into the continent of Africa. So it really is incredibly vast. But at the same time, you know, the continent of Africa is facing incredible and astounding conservation challenges. And especially now during this time of COVID-19, obviously this is a time when there's less ecotourism presence on the ground. And this is the time that poachers unfortunately take advantage of the situation. And Africa's wildlife is certainly now probably under more threat than it has been in the last sort of 20 years, I would say. So I just want to touch quickly on where we are today with conservation in Africa and look back to the recent past on projects. If you go back sort of to the 1980s, there was a great project that was started in Zimbabwe called the Campfire Project, and it dealt with the sustainable utilization of resources in a country. So where there's a national park, the Campfire Project aimed to give community members the tools and the resources to manage their own natural resources in a sustainable way. And then that proved very successful in a country like Zimbabwe. And then we started seeing the emergence of what we call community conservation or community-based conservation, where similarly communities were more involved in the whole conservation and wildlife economy in parts of Africa. And then we saw the term sustainable conservation emerge, which really speaks to the fact that for conservation to be sustainable in Africa, you need to have a viable tourism economy. So you need the economics taken care of, you need the conservation taken care of, and of course, you need the people taken care of. So that's kind of where conservation has morphed up until this point. And I would like to introduce a new term to you tonight. And it's going to be called collaborative conservation, because that's where I believe that the future of Africa's wilderness areas and her wildlife lies, in collaborative conservation. And I'm going to start off by talking about lions. And I'll explain a little bit about collaborative conservation now when we talk about lions, because it's a great example of how this can work really well. So when we talk about lions, and when we think about lions, especially in the tourism space, you know, if you're going on a safari to Africa and you've never been before, I guarantee you that in the top 3 animals that you want to see, lions are going to be on that list. For 90% of people, lions are going to be in the top 3 of the animals they want to see on safari. And so they're very important to our company as a business, but also to the general ecosystem, because lions keep prey numbers in check, and they're a really important signature species of the savannas in Africa. But unfortunately, what most people don't realize when they go to Africa, because when you go on safari, if you're going for 2 or 3 nights or more to a decent safari lodge anywhere in Africa, I can almost guarantee you that you're going to see lions. But few people realize that just in the last 25 years alone, we have lost half of the continental population of lions. So look at those numbers. From 40,000 wild lions in just 1994, today we're left with approximately 20,000 lions. And this is a huge tragedy, because there are as many wild lions left in Africa, or possibly even fewer, than there are rhinos left in Africa. And we've all heard about the plight of rhinos and elephants, but very few of us have actually heard about the plight of lions. We see lions everywhere. We see them in media, we see them in zoos, and of course we see them when we go on safari too. But there are many threats to lions: loss of prey, loss of habitat, and the direct killing of lions because of human lion conflict. And that's a very, very big project, a very big problem across Africa. And so a couple of years ago, we were approached by a great organization called WCN, or the Wildlife Conservation Network, based out of San Francisco. And they started a fund through some funding from the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation called the Lion Recovery Fund. They've got a similar fund for elephants called the Elephant Crisis Fund, and they decided they wanted to do something about this problem with lions. So they formed this organization, this fund called the Lion Recovery Fund. And underneath that, they approached wilderness safaris and said, we want to get some ecotourism partners in this fund, and we'd like to start a coalition called the Lionscape Coalition. And the whole premise behind this is that, yes, we as a business, Wilderness Safaris, we operate in 6 African countries, so we have a very big footprint in Africa. But think about how much more we could do on the continent of Africa if we brought on some of our strongest competitors in the industry to make a difference to lions with us. That way, we can now go and target lions in the areas where Wilderness Safaris doesn't operate, through one of our competitors. And so we love this idea, and Wilderness Safaris, along with the Lion Recovery Fund and WCN, started approaching some of our biggest competitors in the industry. And I'm very pleased to announce today that we've got a whole bunch of our largest competitors now part of the Lionscape Coalition. And our aim is to double the number of wild lions by 2050. So to get back to that 1994 and pre-1994 number by 2050. And so we've brought on the likes of Singita and Great Plains and Beyond and Ultimate Safaris, who operate in Namibia, and then a couple of others have joined us as well, Cilia and Dazzle Africa. They've all come on board to join this amazing coalition. And so the way that it works is we contribute as founding members, we contribute $50,000 a year that go into the Lion Recovery Fund. And a portion of that $50,000 goes to a project that we identify in the areas in which we operate. And then another portion of it goes into the general Lion Recovery Fund pot. And why this is important is because if you look at this map and you start looking at places like West Africa, and sort of more Central Africa, where there's not a strong ecotourism presence, in places like Senegal, for example, they've got no ecotourism. So they've got nothing to underpin and support the conservation of an iconic species like lions. And so a portion of our funding from each one of the partners or the Lionscape Coalition members goes directly into that pot to benefit lions like the critically endangered subspecies of lion, the West African lion, which is found in countries like Senegal. So now I'm going to briefly touch upon one of the most amazing projects which we're involved in on the ground with recovering lion numbers. And this is a project in the Skeleton Coast region of Namibia, and it features some of the most uniquely adapted lions on our planet. These are the desert adapted lions of Namibia. There's only about 150 of them left on our entire planet. And this is where they're found. On that narrow strip of land north of Swakopmund, all the way up to just south of Angola, where the border is with Namibia, and right along the coast there. And that is where you'll find the desert adapted lions of Namibia. And just to give you a little taste of how special these lions are, I'm going to play you a clip, a little trailer from an amazing film that was filmed on one of our concessions, one of our private traversing pieces of land in Namibia called Hwanib Skeleton Coast. And this is the film that was produced. It's an amazing documentary. Those of you that are stuck in quarantine right now, self-isolating, do yourselves a favor and watch this film and the second film. It's absolutely brilliant. Now, can you imagine seeing lions like that? Well, if you're lucky and you go and visit the Skeleton Coast in Namibia, you might be lucky enough to not only come across the lions, but maybe a barefooted human following the lions, Dr. Flip Stander, who is profiled in that film. Now, the film is called Vanishing Kings. It's brilliant. There was also a sequel made called Vanishing Kings 2. So I encourage you to watch those excellent films. But one of the problems facing these desert lions is that although they live in, the oldest desert in the earth with very few people, Namibia as a country is the second most sparsely populated country on our planet, they do come into conflict with people from time to time. And there are communities that are also trying to eke out a living in the desert. And when obviously lions come into conflict with communities, they're finding goats and cattle and donkeys, and lions obviously struggle to find prey in the desert because prey is not abundant. So they'll go crazy when they see some cattle and donkeys. And, often if there's a group of 10 cattle, 12 cattle, those lions will kill the entire lot if they can. And so creates a lot of tension between those local communities and these lions. And so one of the projects that we support on the ground is Flip's organization, which is called Desert Lion Conservation. But we've come up with a really ingenious way of mitigating that human-lion conflict. And this is by collaring at least one of the females in a pride and every single male, because the females will generally stick together, but the males will go off and wander. And those collars will then be fitted with a tracking device. And that tracking device will be relayed back to a kind of a center where we can monitor it. And it'll also beam to these remote alert units. So if you look in these photographs, you'll see us setting up one of these remote alert units. We've just given some funding to provide another 10 collars because we've darted 23 of the lions. So 23 of those 150 desert lions have collars right now. We've provided funding for another 10 collars and 2 of these remote alert units. And what these do, you can see the community in the background there, the remote alert unit in the front. As the lions get to a certain distance away, like 2 kilometers away or so, it's going to trigger on the lights, and the lights go on to warn the community. If they get closer, a siren will sound and warn the community that the lions are close. And if they get even closer or don't move out of the area, we'll send in a response unit who will then dart the lions and get them out of the area or chase them out of the area. So this has been remarkably successful and is a project that we hope to emulate in other areas of Africa where lions come into conflict with people. So it's been a huge success and one of the ways in which we are looking to increase the numbers of lions in Africa. So I thought before we move on to these amazing creatures called African wild dogs, let's see if there's any questions. If anybody wants to raise their hands and ask a question about lion conservation, I'll take that now. Else we can also address those questions at the end. Becca, do we have anybody with a question so far?
Let's see. We don't have any hands raised.
Okay, great.
We don't have any new chats, but if anything comes in, I'll be sure to make note of that, and we can answer it in the second round of Q&A.
Sounds great, thanks. So moving on from one of the largest carnivores in Africa, we now move on to a smaller carnivore, albeit probably the most endangered large carnivore in Africa, along with the Ethiopian wolf is also highly endangered. But African wild dogs, their numbers have plummeted over the years. And if you look at their former range to their current range, you can see it really is a dire situation for African wild dogs. Some of the big problems facing wild dogs are habitat loss and also coming into conflict with people, because if they come into conflict with domestic dogs, for example, they can get canine distemper, and that can just absolutely wipe out an entire pack of wild dogs. So domestic dog diseases and wild dogs do not mix at all. They also require really large habitats in which to roam. very large home ranges. So another species that's facing a lot of trouble in Africa is the African wild dog. Now, in Zimbabwe, there are approximately 700 wild dogs left in the country, and most of them are concentrated in two areas, Hwange National Park and the Mana Pools area. And I've circled those both for you here. Now, the packs in the Mana Pools area up north have really declined drastically in the last sort of 30 years especially. And we're not sure of the reason for this because it's an amazing wilderness area. It's right on the lower Zambezi River. You've got Zambia on the other side of the river, and you've got Zimbabwe on the Mana Pools side of the river, and lots of amazing true wilderness habitat, one of the wildest areas in Africa. So the dogs should be doing really well there. And in fact, we've got actually three camps there, Chikwenya and Rukomachi and Little Rukomachi. And the guests that go stay in Mana Pools, they will see dogs from time to time, but certainly the numbers and the amount of sightings that we've had in the past has declined from what it was, 20 years ago. So we think that the decline of the wild dogs in Mana Pools is not caused by humans or by lack of habitat, but rather by social dynamics. So if we go back a few years ago, there were two very, very dominant females in the Mana Pools area. They were incredibly successful hunters. They knew how to take care of their packs, and they reared successful litters year upon year. And then these two females died of natural causes, and the females that took over were never successful leaders, and they weren't able to successfully keep those packs together, and the packs fragmented. There was one female called Tammy, for example, several years ago. She gave birth to about 40 different pups, and not one of them made it past the age of 6 months. So a really real tragedy there, and it really boiled down to this kind of social dynamics between the packs and internally between the packs in Mana Pools around that area. Now, at the same time, if we go down to the circle around Hwange, which is quite close to Victoria Falls, for those of you that want a kind of positioning in Zimbabwe, in Hwange, the packs are actually holding on. They're doing all right. And there's a particular pack that kept getting out of the park and going into the local communities, and the pack would go and eat goats, and they'd terrorize the communities. And we tried through Painted Dog Conservation, which is the nonprofit on the ground, to relocate those dogs to another part of Hwange, and they just came back to where they came from and went straight out into the communities again. And so we were faced with a bit of a challenge. And through Painted Dog Conservation, Wilderness Safaris helped to airlift a pack of dogs and take them to our new camp called Chikwenya, which is on the lower Zambezi River in Mana Pools, put them in a boma, and aim to release them into the Mana Pools area to supplement the dwindling packs in that area. And I'd like to just play you a little brief video that depicts this amazing project.
The status of painted dogs in Zimbabwe is not great. We estimate around 700. Here, the mid-Zambezi Valley, currently the population is in decline. We developed this partnership with Wilderness. Once we had the green light, so to speak, it's really then getting our head around the logistics. We set up some capture nets in an adjacent enclosure, and we do that the night before. We go into the enclosure where the dogs are and open the gate to the next enclosure where the nets are set up. And they get caught in the nets. We grab them then by hand. The 3 adults were injected with immobilizing drugs. We decided on Chikwenya as the best area, just based on our knowledge of the dog situation in Mana Pools itself, and then managed to fit the 5 crates in. and a very quick flight up from Wangi to Chiquenya. The primary reason for moving them here was to mitigate this human-wildlife conflict. Again, Chiquenya lends itself perfectly to the situation in the sense that we've got so many vehicles out, a very strong presence and a very strong conservation background. And going forward, clients coming here, helping us, understanding the dynamics of the painted dog population, that's a memory that will stay with them for the rest of their life.
So right now, these dogs, the Wangi pack that are now in Mana Pools, are situated in a boma right behind the guest rooms at Chiquenya. Now, obviously, we don't have any guests there right now, but just before this whole Corona thing came around, we had amazing sightings because most mornings, almost every morning while guests were having their tea and coffee on the veranda, there were two female wild dogs from the area that took a liking to the alpha male that was in the boma. And so they were done with their male. I don't know what he did, but he really upset them drastically. And so they would come every morning and they'd come straight to the fence and they'd visit the alpha male from this pack. And basically these two female wild dogs, wild dogs, would run straight through Chiquenya, straight through the camp, go to the boma, visit with the male, spend about half an hour there running around the boma, getting to know this male, and then they would disappear. And we're going to release this pack in April, and then we found out that the alpha female of this pack, called Snowtail, was pregnant. And I'm very excited to announce that just 2 weeks ago now, we found out that she had given birth to a litter of tiny wild dog pups. And we placed a kennel inside the boma and she gave birth in the kennel. And so now we're going to release this extended pack of wild dogs. Their numbers already bolstered, which is really great news. We're going to release them in August, hopefully in time for our guests that return to the wonderful country of Zimbabwe and the incredible wilderness area that is Mana Pools. And just so that you know, Mana Pools and Zimbabwe, in fact, as a country, they're really unique in terms of a safari destination because it offers you the ability to get out on foot with some of the most highly trained guides in Africa. And one of the most exhilarating experiences you can do is walking on foot with wild dogs. I've had the great privilege of doing it on several occasions. And, there's never been a documented case of wild dogs attacking a human. So it's quite safe to walk with them on foot. And it's amazing because at first they'll be really shy and then you could view them sort of from a distance. But if you crouch down and you just remain really quiet, they're quite inquisitive and you can get wild dogs coming right up to you. In fact, I've had wild dogs within 6 feet of me, like running around me, just in the long grass, absolutely amazing sighting. So this is one of the benefits when coronavirus does disappear and we can return to places like Zimbabwe and Botswana and Namibia, which incidentally have very few cases of coronavirus. In fact, Namibia and Botswana haven't had any new cases for 2 to 3 weeks. I think we're talking 16 cases in the entire country of Namibia. If we look at Botswana, I think they've had in the mid-20s in terms of cases. So they've been very effective in shutting the virus down. And obviously it's a lot easier in countries that are very sparsely populated, like Zimbabwe, which is also sparsely populated, and then Botswana and Namibia, which are two of the most sparsely populated countries on earth. And so I'm just going to throw this in there, but when this all opens up, I think Africa is going to be very well positioned because by our nature, there's a lot of social distancing on safari. You're in smaller camps. Our camps, for example, are 9 to 12 rooms at a time. So you're never with more than like 20 people, open air vehicles. There's natural social distancing when you're in these very sparsely populated countries in true wilderness areas in Africa. And I think that's a great benefit. And hopefully when you come back, you'll be able to see these wild dogs running around the Chikwenya area of Mana Pools. And we're going to close with, I think, one of the most really exciting projects that we've been involved with as a company in the remarkable country of Rwanda. And this revolves around chimpanzees. And just so that I can paint a little bit of a history of our presence in Rwanda, this new place, Gishwati, is situated about a 40-minute drive from Lake Kivu. But just a few years ago, we opened an amazing luxury lodge about 2 hours north of Gishwati in a place called Basati in Volcanoes National Park. And this experience at this amazing luxury camp centers around the critically endangered mountain gorillas of Volcanoes National Park. And once we were there and we started Basati, we decided to get involved in an amazing park in the east of the country called Akagera National Park. And Akagera is right on the border with Tanzania, and it is a big 5 reserve. So previously, Rwanda was looked at as the Gorilla Express. You'd come to Rwanda to see the gorillas. You'd go see the gorillas, maybe spend 2 days in the country, and then you'd get out and you'd go to Tanzania or Kenya to continue on with your safari. Well, now we're looking at Rwanda with its incredible safety record, one of the safest countries on the planet, with an incredible government, a lot of devotion to conservation and community development. We've looked to now look at Rwanda as a destination rather than just the Gorilla Express. And so we started Magashi, the big 5 reserve. We've then got Basati with the mountain gorillas. And our latest project, we signed an agreement with the Rwandan Development Board 2 years ago to manage a tiny remnant patch of forest for tourism. And this is Gishwati Forest. Now, quite astounding that in the 1970s, there was over 30,000 hectares of this forest. Today, there's only a few thousand remaining. Look at the satellite image from 1986 to 2001. And obviously, you know, this forest is in the most densely populated country in Africa, Rwanda. And obviously, there's been a lot of heavy use of that forest for clearing it for agriculture, for livestock, and also for use for firewood. And so we've lost over 90% of the fauna in that forest, critical biodiversity loss. And in fact, that same forest used to wrap all the way down. It used to be a continuous patch of forest around Lake Kivu, down to the south where the Nyungwe forest is in the south of Rwanda. And then it wrapped its way around the lake all the way continuously to the jungles of the Congo. So it went all the way around from Lake Kivu, all the way to the jungles of Central Africa. And that's all that we've got that remains, is that tiny little patch today of a few thousand hectares. And in 2008, there were only 13 eastern chimpanzees left in this forest. And why this is so important from a conservation background is that there are 4 different subspecies of chimpanzees. There used to be, if you looked at the continent of Africa, you know, in the sort of early 1900s, up to sort of 1920s, 1930s, there were well over 1 million chimps in Africa. Today, there's only about 200,000 chimps left in Africa, and they're broken down to 4 subspecies. There's the Niger Cameroon species, there's the Western chimpanzee species, there's the central subspecies, and then there's the Eastern subspecies of chimpanzee. Now, recent genetic testing has suggested that the Eastern subspecies be broken down into 2 separate subspecies, the Eastern subspecies and a further subspecies called the Southeastern chimpanzee. Now, this is critically important because this subspecies is only found in Rwanda, Burundi, and a small piece of Uganda. So critically endangered, these chimps. 13 left here in 2008. Now there's well over 30. We partner with an amazing organization called Forests of Hope, and their job is to replant that forest with community involvement They're a Rwandan nonprofit. They do great work on the ground. We've also partnered with Westchester University, who are doing amazing research on these last remaining chimps. And so we've built a little research station with 2 rooms to start with now. And basically we go there and we habituate those chimps on a daily basis. So I want to just show you a little map on how this works. So in July last year, we were getting about a 30% success rate on any given day throughout the month. So 30% of the month we would see chimpanzees. By December last year, because we were out in the field with 6 trackers in this small forest every single day, we've managed to get the viewing of these chimpanzees up to over 80%. And we're hoping in the next 2 years to build a luxury safari lodge here where you can go and track amazing chimpanzees, and then you can journey 2 hours by car, and you can go to Volcanoes National Park and see gorillas at the same time. The park's amazing. It's not only home to chimpanzees, but also amazing primate species like mountain monkeys on the left-hand side there, and also golden monkeys as well. So going forward, an incredible itinerary for a place like Rwanda would be, you know, seeing the big 5 amazing leopard sightings in Akagera National Park, with incredible diversity of antelope as well, from high altitude antelope right down to sort of the grazers like buffalo and the open plains game as well. And then elephant and rhino at Akagera, great lion sightings, then go to see the mountain gorillas, spend some time in Kigali, which is one of the most fascinating capitals of any country, really clean and tidy, maybe visit the Genocide Memorial, learn a little bit about the history of this remarkable country, and obviously spend some time with the chimps around Lake Kivu. And I'd like to just close with mentioning that, you know, Alluring Africa partners with amazing partners in Africa like Wilderness Safaris, and they very carefully vet who they partner with in Africa because of their commitment to conservation and community development on the ground. And I'm very proud to work for Wilderness Safaris and to show you a little graphic on our last financial year. So this was financial year 2018. Figures came out, you know, middle of 2019. So look at that graph. I mean, $14.7 million of our revenue went directly into conservation. Now that's not including our in-kind donations like, you know, flying animals from here to there using our aircraft. This is pure financial contributions into conservation. It's also in addition to the $36 million that is used in the creation of employment in rural areas. And of course, part of that $14.7 million on an annual basis that goes into conservation, very important component of that is obviously community development and community conservation efforts. So we have a great program called Children in the Wilderness, which is a fantastic, fantastic program, which involves getting kids out into these wilderness areas to experience the same things that you as guests would experience at our camps. So getting the people from these communities to see lions and to see giraffe and to see rhinos in these areas and get them involved in the whole conservation process. And so I'd like to thank you all so much for listening. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and we'll open it up for questions for the next sort of 15 minutes. Take some questions before we close out. Thank you all so much for listening.
Awesome, James. Thanks so much. We had a few questions come in earlier. So I'll start with the lions in Namibia. We had a question come in asking, how often are the lions moved and relocated to the different conservancies?
So the lions of Namibia, thanks for that question. The lions of Namibia, they're very, very different to lions anywhere else in Africa. They have territories that are 10, if not 20 times larger than, let's say, a lion in the Kruger National Park or a lion in the Serengeti or the Masai Mara, because they're forced to roam over these vast distances in the desert, looking for food and, you know, maintaining their territory. So there's actually very little darting of lions from one area to another unless they get out into community areas. We'll then sometimes have to dart those lions, relocate them into an area where they're safe from coming into conflict with people. But lions will roam vast areas. If I showed you on that map, we had a male lion that roamed from the south of the Skeleton Coast all the way up to Angola, crossed the border into Angola and came back again. And I don't know the exact distance of that, but that's got to be, 1,000 kilometers or something like that. A huge, wow. Huge distance. So they roam these vast distances, very difficult to keep them contained to like one concession because they roam over such vast areas. But when they do create problems with community areas, we'll then, obviously dart them, and put them in an area where they're further away.
Great. And then on the topic of wild dogs, can you talk more about the pups in the Mana Pools area that weren't able to live past 6 months? Can you explain why they weren't able to thrive?
Yeah, it's a tragic story, and we don't know the exact reasons. We really have no idea beyond just surmising that the dominant females that try to take over from these previously 2 very successful alpha females were just very poor leaders. And I think, we could draw parallels with human society. When we have a poor leader of a country, obviously the country can crumble, and it takes a new election for you to get a new leader in for things to start looking positive again. And I think very similar for wild dog dynamics. And we surmise that these weaker females that took over from these very successful females were just very bad leaders. They didn't know how to motivate their pack members to hunt properly. Maybe their hunting tactics weren't as strong as the other dogs. They weren't able to, sustain those pups. There could have been some environmental factors that came into play. In other words, drought, which can definitely affect prey numbers. And I think it might have been a combination of environmental factors along with poor leadership that led to such a poor success rate of bringing those cubs to adulthood. Because we must remember that if we look at all the successful predators of Africa, wild dogs, when they hunt, are going to have the highest hunt to kill success ratio of any of the carnivores. So we're looking at about when wild dogs decide to hunt something, they will normally kill it 7 out of 10 times. That's way higher than, let's say, lions, which might be in the 20% range of their hunts that are successful. So generally, they can be very successful. With poor leadership, that number is going to drop dramatically. And then obviously environmental factors can play a role as well.
That's a great point. We just had another great question come in about the wild dogs. What is their main food source other than other small animals?
So the main food source for wild dogs will generally be small to medium-sized antelope. So animals like impala are the preferred food source. Obviously, impala are incredibly quick and agile antelope, but wild dogs are incredibly persistent. They hunt by basically exhausting their prey to death. So while the antelope will initially be way quicker than them, the impalas will take off, they'll leap and they'll bound. The wild dogs will just keep following and they'll stay hot on the trail, and eventually those antelope will get exhausted. The wild dogs have incredible stamina and they'll overtake their prey and then they'll disembowel them and eat them. So generally they prefer small to medium-sized antelope, but they will take prey like younger zebra, wildebeest, etc., especially when they're desperate, but they are also opportunistic. So if they come across something when they're hungry and they're hunting, and it's a larger pack of dogs, that's also critical, is obviously the larger the pack of dogs, the larger prey items they can take down. But generally, if you were to wager a bet and you're watching wild dogs hunting, medium-sized antelope like impala, nyala, smaller female kudu and young kudu, those are the type of antelope that they're going to prefer and try to take down.
Great. So on the same topic, the lions in Namibia, what is their food source like?
well, the lions of Namibia are incredibly specialized. So where lions in other areas might be a little bit picky in terms of their favored prey items. So if you take a pride of lions in, let's say, Kruger National Park, or in South Africa or in East Africa, lions quite quickly become specialists in a certain prey item. So they will, in an area where, let's say, zebra are abundant, lions might adapt their hunting strategies. A certain female in a pride will teach the other females to hunt zebra, and they become what are called zebra specialists. They'll almost always target zebra if possible. Yes, they'll take other prey items, but zebra will be their favored prey species. Now, when you get lions in the desert, like the desert adapted lions, they're not that lucky. So they don't have the option to choose from a whole range of species that are in abundance, one particular species. They now have to take whatever comes their way. But in the desert, there's also desert adapted animals besides lions. So there's desert adapted elephant, desert adapted rhinos, desert adapted giraffe. And so the lions in the desert, obviously, the prides there are not big enough to take down elephants. So very rarely will you find lions taking down elephants in Namibia, unless it's a calf that's been cut off from its herd. Similarly, they're not going to take black rhinos in the desert very often at all. But they have specialized in targeting desert adapted giraffe. And they do target giraffe and oryx, which are gemsbok with the long horns. And oryx can be very formidable opponents, as can giraffes. And so there's huge risks for desert adapted lions when they hunt both those species. But like I said, they live in this desert, they can't be picky. And if, there's anything else, small rodents, mice, lizards, pretty much anything that they can come across, they will eat, especially in times of need. So highly adaptable, but will focus on oryx and giraffe, and have learned to hunt these species quite successfully in the desert. I will say one further thing with the desert adapted lions is we've noticed just recently that the desert adapted lions have found the seal colony on the Skeleton Coast. And this is remarkable because that seal colony is obviously very vulnerable. So it's going to be interesting to see the seals pup on the beaches there. They give birth to very vulnerable pups on the beach right there in their thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. And so there's this amazing food source for these lions that until now, we've had no proof that they have discovered. So it's going to be interesting to see that now that they have discovered them, do they remain in that area and become seal specialists, feeding on the seals on the coastline there. And that'll be a pretty incredible safari opportunity in the future if it does come to light. Can you imagine going and sitting right on the Atlantic Ocean in the oldest desert on Earth, watching a few of the last remaining desert adapted lions on our planet hunt seals in the waves of the Atlantic Ocean? I mean, it would be phenomenal.
Wow.
So that's something to watch for the future. But thank you for the question.
So how much does it cost to donate a lion collar?
So I don't know the exact amount. I think the collars are several $100s, approaching maybe $800 or so a collar. I'd have to find out the exact amount, but I think it's in that region. And then obviously there are those remote units as well, which are set up. But just to give you an example, we recently donated $20,000 and it paid for 10 collars and 2 of those remote alert units. So if we're looking at, let's say, $800 to $1,000 a collar, and then maybe $5,000 for each of those remote units, something around those kind of numbers, we're looking at for the collars and the remote units. But they're very successful and highly in demand. So hopefully this is something we can replicate in other areas of Africa where it makes sense as well.
So we had a question come in from a veterinarian. She wanted to know what could you give us some examples of conservation projects that guests could get involved in on the ground at wilderness camps?
So this is always difficult to organize.
Mm-hmm.
We've tried it in the past, and I'm not going to say we've never done it, because we have. And to be quite honest, a partner like Alluring Africa would probably have the most success in convincing wilderness to put together something like this, because we've worked with Alluring for so many years and they're such strong partners of ours. So yes, we have done it in the past, but generally it's quite difficult because the conservation groups that we work with on the ground, their primary concern is obviously conservation. So we've got to also then manage the expectations of our guests, because let's say guests get down there on a certain date, they're expecting to go out and dart wild dogs or collar a lion. And for whatever reason, the lions have moved off into the mountains and we have to delay it by a week. People that are traveling from America aren't flexible enough to often change their dates or to wait. So yes, we've done it in the past, and other companies have done, had the opportunity to dart a rhino, for example, and maybe dehorn a rhino or take part in those conservation efforts. So it's not out of the question. They're just pretty difficult to organize logistically on the ground for those two reasons that I've mentioned. Conservationists wanting the best welfare for the animals on the ground, and then our guests obviously managing their expectations. What if we can't do it at that time? So probably best to have a backup plan. If you are planning something like that, it's best to present it as, well, there's a 50% chance of us being able to do this, but we'll only know when we get there, kind of thing. And if we can do it, maybe you can contribute to conservation on the ground. So there's always that route to take, which I believe is the safest option versus actually planning something, charging guests for it, and then disappointing them.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And then we had one question come in about Kevin Richardson. Are you familiar with Kevin Richardson?
Sure.
And what is your opinion about him and his conservation of lions?
Well, to be honest, I don't know him personally, so I always think that it's, I tend to reserve judgment on people that I don't know, and I haven't given, them the opportunity or the benefit of defending themselves or presenting their case in person. So it's very easy for people to criticize other people behind the scenes without actually knowing the good that they're doing for a particular species. I have heard stuff that, some controversial issues about him, obviously, and there's controversial stuff. There's controversial stuff and there's good stuff. So you've got to carefully weigh up which are facts and which are rumor mongering. And I'm not really in a position to really know the difference, because I don't know the individual personally. I've only heard of him. What I will say though is, I do think that, and this is my personal opinion, I do think that he's playing with fire with his cats, without a doubt, on a daily basis. My experience of lions is only with wild lions, but I've had some pretty close calls with lions over the years, and I certainly would never get in an enclosure with lions, domesticated, wild, semi-wild, you name it. I just believe that lions are wild animals, and they can never be truly tamed. That is my opinion, and I think that he's certainly risking his life and possibly the lives of his lions by spending time with them. But that's his decision. So I can't comment either way on whether it's wrong or not. It's just personally, I think it's dangerous.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Do we have any more questions? Well, if you do have any more questions, feel free to email them to me, whether they are conservation-related questions, travel-related questions. I can connect you with James, and we'll get those answered. So, James, I want to thank you for joining us today and giving us those awesome updates. Like I said, if you have any travel-related questions, my email is hello@alluringafrica.com. And our phone number is 321-6 622-9370. And be sure to tune in next Tuesday. Michonne and Liz are taking you through Botswana. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week. And we look forward to connecting with you next week.
Thank you all very much. And just a final message from me. If you want to support conservation in Africa, please, when this whole thing disappears, please fulfill your dreams and come back to Africa, because that's the best way that you can support conservation on the ground. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, James. Well said.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.